how did the amendments to the bill today change it?
Change the bill, yeah.
And you spoke and said that it was these were improvements to the bill.
Well, some people won't see them as improvements. I think tenants will feel like we've given way too much away. Not just tenants, but a number of people in our party felt like we went too far in the interest of landlords. I think what our committee was trying to do was find a really good balance between helping stabilize tenants in their places and yet not taking into considerations that landlords have had, particularly small landlords. So what the bill did was, there are two parts to the bill. One is in cases where we may have a very distorted market and we have very little vacancy available and rents have gone skyrocketing, cities need to have the tools to be able to implement a rent stabilization ordinance. And so the base bill just said we should lift the preemption, and the League of Cities was very supportive. We had a number of people representing different cities and counties that felt very strongly that they should have this tool when you've got speculation and prices going up and people can no longer live in the community. You've got firefighters and teachers and people who clean homes, etc., who are artists who can no longer live close to where they work. And so for instance, in Portland, we're getting tremendous congestion because we keep having people move farther and farther east for cheaper rent and then coming into the city. So cities have made a very strong argument. What the amendment did, the -6, is said, okay, we're going to lift the preemptions, and so cities can still have an ordinance, but they need to do three things. First, they need to make sure that there's a fair rate of return for landlords. And a lot of cities who have used rent stabilization peg it to the CPI, or the Consumer Price Index. And cities should talk about what is a fair way of considering fair rate of return. The second thing that the -6 amendments did on rent stabilization was said, even if you guarantee landlords a fair rate of return, then you still need an appeals process, because maybe whatever you figured out for your formula, say it's CPI, maybe that's not enough in a particular circumstance. Maybe a landlord wants to refinance and upgrade the apartments. That should be considered, because they need to pay a higher mortgage at that point. And the third thing it did was say any newly constructed building is not subject to rent stabilization for the first 5 years of its occupancy. Because when new buildings come online, sometimes they get their mortgage based on what they think their income can be. And then maybe once they open it, they don't quite get the income in that first year. You don't know that first, so it's kind of a buffer. You may see that Mark Meek had said, ideally, if he could have gotten everything he wanted, he would have put 15 years just to give ample buffer in order to make sure that that we continue to increase supply. And this was really a floor. The 5 years was cities have to exempt any new construction for the first 5 years, but of course they can go farther. If supply is a really big issue, and if they think that lending is tight or any kind of reason, they may want to go to 10 or 15 years. So that was the rent stabilization piece. The other piece of the bill was the no cause, or many people like to say no stated cause, for eviction. Usually there is some cause, right? You don't just do it out of the air. So I've started to say no stated cause now. And the idea of that is, the reason that is statewide is because this is not just about a distorted market where prices are going up astronomically. We know some people get a no stated cause eviction because maybe they can't pay a rent increase, and the landlord would like to upgrade and have a much higher rent. So we know that happens, and that's going to happen in a distorted market more often. But we also know that often people are kicked out. They might be paying rent and everything, but they're kicked out and they're not really even given a reason at all. I've had a lot of moms come to me and say, I had 3 kids, I don't know, they're not supposed to discriminate against families. Maybe they didn't like, our kids being kind of noisy in the pitter patter. They're not given a reason. They can't even try to work it out. And so, and it could also be somebody moves in and, the landlord likes them, or the neighbors like them, and then all of a sudden they bring home their gay partner, and maybe the landlord or the neighbors don't agree with that. Well, that would be discrimination, but we don't know that because they don't have to give any reason. So we have Fair Housing Act that's supposed to protect, but it doesn't if we also say, in this state, you can just evict someone without cause. And so this is really the reason that that's statewide instead of just cities do it, is we really feel that it's important to give people, Oregonians, and again, 40% of them are renters, due process. So if the renters are doing something wrong, they're not paying, or they've broken the lease, they've brought in a pet when they're not allowed to on the lease, or they're smoking, or they're bringing people in who are living there, and the lease clearly says you can't bring anyone else in unless you add them to the lease. A whole number of reasons that that tenants can be taken to court, and actually that process is way faster than the no-cause eviction process. So that all remains in place, and we want to make sure that landlords, when there is a problem with a tenant, give them due process in court. And if it's found that the tenant is at fault, they're dealing drugs, they're doing anything, we want to make sure that that problem, in a no-cause eviction, that problem just gets passed on to another landlord. So what the bill also does, the baseline bill, it says, okay, if the landlord does want to leave, there are all kinds of reasons why a landlord, not for a tenant reason, but for a landlord reason, can ask somebody to leave. If they want to move in themselves, or they want direct family to move in, or they want to demolish the building, or use it for another purpose, or sell it, or rehabilitate it. There's all kinds of reasons that are acceptable for a landlord to use their property the way they'd like to use their property, and that's fine. But the original bill said, okay, that's fine, but if you're going to do that, you need to give 3 months relocation. The amendment, so all that's the base bill. The amendment said, well, first of all, we're going to exempt people that have 4 homes or less, because those are really more the mom and pops. It's when you get to 5 or more that these are people who are doing it for a living, not a supplement to the retirement, or I can't sell my home, so I'm going to put it on the market, and I'm leaving town, and I've got another job, and I don't have time to put on the market, or my mom just died and I inherited her house. Those are kind of the accidental or supplemental. But if you're doing 5 or more, it's really a business. And if you're operating this as a business, and you're going to evict people who have been there, acting in good faith, paying their rent all the time, then you need to pay them 1 month. So originally it said 3 months. Now we reduced it to 1 month. So those are the 2 really big things that we did with this bill, is that we said the relocation assistance is important, but we're only going to make it for 5 units or above. And secondly, we're not going to say 3 months, we're going to say 1. So those were 2 really big changes. And then lastly, the last change we did in the -6 was said, you may still use, as a landlord of any size, you may still use the no cause in the first 6 months of tenancy. Because if it's like not a FED eviction, they've done something wrong, and it's not the landlord wants to do something else with the building, but it's just there's something, it's like that, that thing they keep saying, the creepy tenant or something, you can't like pinpoint it, you can't put it through the court process, but there's something not really right. Some people call this the release valve, other people call it the security blanket. All right, we heard a lot from landlords who said, I hardly ever do this, but in the rare case that I need it, I'd really like to have that. And so we thought, all right, we'll put 6 months where you can use no cause. So you don't do relocation, you don't give any reason. It's kind of the buffer. So I thought those were really bending over backwards to listen to the concerns of landlords, and what are the ones that really rise to the top all the time. And that's what the amendments did, and I really appreciate Representative Mark Meek doing it, because he's a realtor, he's a landlord, he's a property manager. His wife is a large property manager, and he was really able to help us hone in on what are some of the things that are the hardest for landlords. And yet he also has heard a lot from tenants, in the 6-hour hearing that we had, as well as the forum that we held, I think it was early February, that we held in Portland, and just canvassing door to door. He heard the incredible stress that tenants are under right now.